Welcome to another episode of the Workplace Insights podcast. Today I'm talking to Eugene. Eugene is a consultant, and we get into the weeds on data analytics and particularly the difference between occupancy and utilization. What is the metric we need?
Look, to be very blunt and forthright about this, I think it's utilization as a defined metric. And I think, as we were discussing before, there's articles starting to pop up now on LinkedIn, on Business Insider, and all the usuals. And it's this new metric will change, how you use the office. And I think I can actually have to ask ChatGPT for a sanity check and kind of go, look, is there a difference between utilization and occupancy? Because when you look at the office and the workplace operational model it had to fit into before, it was a simple means to an end. And it was assumed that, as we see with probably the most publicly available data sets, I think in America, the Castle Index will probably be, the barometer people go to. And the Castle Index is just badge taps. It assumes that, a person goes to the office and they're going to be there for the planned amount of time in the planned amount of square foot or square meters that has been, allocated per employee. And, I think we started to notice that change before the pandemic. There was already flexibility creeping into the workplace from a Monday and Friday thing, and a lot more flexibility around, especially people with kids and stuff like that. I think it went under the radar, and the divergences weren't really wide enough between what we would understand as occupancy, which is, binary, and utilization, which is, per whatever you want it to be, probably per hour. And I think post-pandemic, what we're seeing now, and I think the trends are really bearing out and even diverging even further between the two metrics. I think it's really incumbent now to focus on utilization rather than occupancy, given that, the insights and actionable insights, and not to overuse that phrase because it's a bit jingoistic at this point. If you want to start solving problems or start looking for efficiencies or start looking for opportunities, your starting point is going to be the more granular metric, which is utilization, rather than assuming the full block of a day.
Utilization is a summary that utilization is perhaps more dynamic and fluid, and occupancy is much more static. It's just like how many people have passed the gate today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about this last night in terms of like, how did we get stuck with occupancy? And I think we got stuck with occupancy because when offices began their inception, let's say going back 100 years, everyone went to the office Monday to Friday, and it was just occupancy assumed 100% utilization. Whereas given things are so dynamic right now, and ever more so dynamic, we believe, utilization seems to provide organizations with a more agile way to kind of track and understand everything about the workplace, whether that's employee behavior, whether that's, again, then true to utilities, especially where a lot of the opportunities seem to be.
You might not know this about me. You've known me for quite some time, but maybe here's something I've never shared with you. I'm just thinking about this now based on this topic, but I once worked as a casual employee for the Australian Census.
Wow.
And so this was, my job was to go around my home suburb of Villawood and with a government badge and give people the forms to have them fill in the census.
Yeah.
And one of the first things we're trying to find out is occupancy. Who's in these homes? Are these homes occupied, and by who, and what's their demographic info? So that leads to like data for the government to use for their planning purposes. In my area, it was a very multicultural area, western suburbs of Sydney, and most houses, well, maybe not most, but a large percentage of the homes were non-English speaking people and saw the government badge, and they just slammed the door in my face because they thought
I was a fluid movement of opening and closing the door in one movement. It's quite beautiful.
But this, I often think about this idea of like taking a census of the building, and we often borrow language and concepts in our industry from hospitality. Like we in workplace we always talk about like the concierge and hospitality like services that they provide to their employees and visitors. And even this static idea of like, is the room occupied? If I'm a hotel, I want to know if my room is occupied. But the hotel also wants to know, are my other spaces utilized? What's the flow rate between, the hotel guests leading into the gaming floor or the convention center, or vice versa, holding these conventions as they get more people booking my rooms. And this dynamic approach of like, how does space get utilized, with occupancy being one thing and utilization being the other. What do you think is the gap? Like what aren't we measuring correctly to get the dynamic information out of utilization?
I think to take a step back, first of all, and kind of address what we're looking at. And primarily we're talking about office commercial real estate here, which has been really grounded in occupancy as a metric. And just reading a quote from, I think it's a recent JLL global survey workplace insights. And it certainly mirrors the CBRE one as well. And the quote is quite eloquent in a way, and it's rethinking performance measurement. The time is ripe for a radical rethink of performance measurement in commercial real estate, identifying measures that cement the link between CRE strategy and organizational effectiveness, etc., etc. Real estate performance and value will come under scrutiny like never before. Now, when you look at self-storage, key metric in self-storage commercial real estate is utilization.
Yeah.
It's not occupancy, it's utilization. It's, Jon is storing, something for half a day, for half a week, half a month. And I think it's the more I kind of look at other commercial real estate classes, utilization seems to be their benchmark. And I think that is also somewhat true in hospitality to a degree as well. So kind of providing that context, I think within the commercial real estate office context, I think, if 10%, typically the life cycle employee cost is 30, 10, and 10 being the commercial real estate cost, the office costs. And I think looking at that from a cost basis has probably led the industry and led the complexity of the systems that, Place OS is looking to address in buildings or portfolios down a value engineered, a poor path in terms of value engineering, rather than looking at it from a workforce perspective in this new hybrid operational model, where instead of looking at the building resource, you're looking at the use from an employee's perspective. And I think that's the lens that really will help organizations be more agile as, the dog leading the tail really changes the demand in future.
I think that keyword performance is interesting. What I'm seeing from customers today is a breakaway from some of the real estate metrics, such as cost per square foot, to more, I guess, software metrics of cost per user. And that aligns with a lot of the hard lifting that WeWork did. That sometimes they don't get the credit for the what they created. Tall poppy syndrome, perhaps, shooting down successful companies. But this idea of the real estate cost can be a cost per user, just as the cost of the laptop is a cost per user, and these things can combine. And when you look at it that way, it doesn't have to be cost per employee; it's cost per employee that's there right now. So the real-time adoption, the real-time consumption of real estate, I think that falls under the umbrella of utilization rather than occupancy.
Absolutely. And I think, not to go down this tangent unless maybe at the end of the call we could, but looking for analogies in the change of organizational behavior in regards to the resource that is their offices. It reminds me somewhat of the change from on-prem to cloud, and in a lot of different ways, especially in the way that like people are looking at, a lot of people are jumping into this very binary fashion. It's like it's going to be return to office or it's going to be working from home, and the reality is it's going to be, more in the middle. And I think taking that and looking at where that has gone over time, it went from centralized servers to distributed computing, and the economics of that have changed from application costs. So what is my infrastructure cost per application, to now starting to move to what's my application cost per user, whether that's a customer or whether that's an internal employee. And I think that's exactly where commercial real estate will go. To your point, if you were paying somebody, let's say, look, Dublin city centre here, it's a very high cost location, a lot of multinationals. If you're paying somebody, six figures to be in the office, what's the return investment that resource is providing? Like, the office is a place to drive utility and productivity. It can also be a nice place to go and the experience and all that, but the bottom line is a bottom line, especially in this new economic environment where we're seeing the likes of Facebook and Google. Facebook in their K10 filing, real estate, performance, productivity, called it quite explicitly. Then we're looking at Google, and they're trying to manage that Monday to Friday bell curve and squish it out so that they're driving utilization of their buildings, adequate utilization of their buildings on the Monday and Friday, but managing overutilization of their buildings on the third Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday peak.
I think one of the biggest disconnects at the moment, I mean, you've mentioned commercial real estate, and if we really simplify what commercial real estate is, particularly for the workplace context, there's the landlord and there's the tenant, and in a way they have conflicting needs right now. The landlord wants to sell space, and the tenant wants to only use as much space as they need exactly. So like be completely efficient with their space per user, and ideally pay for it in a flexible lease arrangement where they only pay for what they're consuming, and they can breathe in and out with their consumption of the space as much as possible. But the commercial real estate still pretty old school, slow moving, used to running on building cycle scale. So buildings can take 10 years from design to complete of construction, and then leases have historically been long. So everything's just, they're built to be slow moving, and they're still selling real estate as a function of a lease per square meter. I've heard in concept of real estate firms or landlords, if we dumb it down again, a group of people in the industry, we can call them landlords. I've heard them talk about real-time consumption, and I just haven't seen it in action anywhere. And even that's, I think, a bit of a disconnect, where there might be a lab space or technology division of a real estate firm that have all these wonderful ideas, but the commercial building, doesn't follow through to the people selling commercial space.
That is what the industry is struggling with right now. I'm seeing a lot of conflicting messages, because you can see, the big guys like the CBREs, they're certainly looking around the corner in this. They're not living in the past. They've some really interesting individuals working with them now. Dave Cairns is one who is a massive remote and hybrid advocate. And you might look at CBRE and go, look, why would you hire, why would you hire someone to represent you in this fashion? I think it's just dealing with reality. And maybe to use, I don't mean to be insulting in terms of using these terms, but I feel they're appropriate. I think there's a lot of copium that the game has changed, and there's a lot of hopium that the game will change back. And reading a lot of, especially in the Irish context here, reading a lot of the quarterly circulars of BNP Paribas, CBRE, JLL, Knight Black, Savills in particular. A lot of them are, look, tech will start hiring again, and there'll be thousands and thousands of people come back, and we won't be in negative absorption to stock that's coming, and not utilizing stock that is being built right now and being provided. I think they're completely missing the point that in the hybrid operational context, which is just not going to go away, there'll be varying degrees of it, that to that end, how the employee actually uses the office is going to be quite different to, how the Googles and the Facebooks and the Salesforces are going to use the office is going to be as inefficient as it previously was. You
Yeah.
can certainly argue that, what is it now? I saw a figure in 6 months ago that the global commercial real estate industry, and this entire commercial real estate industry, is something like I did write it down, it's 280 trillion asset class now. It's probably a little bit less, given values are, in my opinion, becoming more realistic. But it's one of the largest asset classes, but it's the most poorly managed, the most inefficient asset classes going. So in seeing those circulars, I think we're in this phase now where we can see some of the industry kind of confront reality and embrace it. I've seen opinion pieces kind of argue the point that from an investor's perspective and an owner's perspective, actually maybe running your building as a flex model might be a de-risking exercise, because as we see here in Dublin, Facebook now are subletting a massive proportion of their office space because they signed a 25-year lease. They really were gunning for things, and the game changed quite a lot. So from that perspective, I don't think it helps the owner of that building's value, desired valuation of the building, to see that their key client, who are supposed to be occupying it 100%, say, look, we probably won't need a lot of this for a decade. And in that sense, I think seeing people or commercial real estate brokers and organizations kind of get the reality of it, and understand what the customers want, versus what they want to fall back on. And look, we could get into a sales discussion here. Has the goals been passed down from the corporate strategy to the people on the ground? Or the people on the ground not goals to play the new game and cater to the demands of the market now, which seems to be much more, on demand as a service, versus trying to talk them into, look, it'll all be good. Young people, they actually want to come to the office every day, or the other way around. So I think that inflection point right now is why there's so much noise, and kind of coming back and focusing on metrics is probably the most productive thing. I think an add-on to that actually is, and you probably have a lot more to say about this, given some of the projects you're working on right now, is the whole ESG side of things, energy cost and ESG. So when, it's very, anyone listen to this, if you're not FAO, they can look up the GREBS B requirements for ESG reporting. And it is really, really simple stuff. But there's a field for landlords and there's a field for tenants. And oftentimes the landlord have to complete it, whatever way the deal has worked. Maybe it's an all-in cost. It's for the landlord to fill out. And I've kind of confronted this with a few people and said, look, is any CFO not going to look at this and just kind of draw a diagonal line per user underneath it? I think that's really such a compelling, for want of a better way to put it, event that's, no matter what clients want, no matter what landlords, owners want, that's going to drive what we're talking about here, which is a cost per user basis.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fundamental when less people are coming in and they're so visible, and then you're like, we have all this space, and for a personal example, I'm not a big employer, but in Sydney I have a team, about 18 people. I have an office that could fit all 18 people all at once. But only 2 or 3 people are ever there at most on a given day. So I'm looking at my office that could, easily have 5 meetings running at once and 20 people working there. And I'm like, well, what's this real estate cost divided by the 3 users that are here right now? It's just not worth it. And that's my small scale. So the multinational, as you scale this out, there'll be so much inefficiencies when it comes to space, and they probably don't even have the right type of space for the people that have turned up in the first place.
And that's the beauty of, I think, that's the excitement of this industry right now, and genuine excitement is the value capture. So you could plan for 10 square meters per employee, but on a Monday, you could effectively extrapolating the cost be consuming a cost per square meter at a low density that could equal a penthouse apartment in Sydney.
Yes,
Like that's a way
exactly.
that
Which,
I've heard it equated here. Looking at some of the figures in Dublin, looking at some of the published occupancy figures and drilling down, kind of looking at what utilization could be, kind of scratching your head going, look, you're probably paying maybe $7,000 a year, per employee at a medium to low stocking density. But actual utilization, you're wasting the cost of what is probably getting in your way now of hiring talent, which is, housing costs.
yeah,
And so, such a massive divergence. It's the common sense question. You're probably you've been scratching your head kind of going, why am I paying for a space for 18 people when
yeah. And,
utilization
and, I,
for less?
and and we've decided at the end of our lease, we're going to go to co-working. Most likely a WeWork. We have friends at WeWork, so we want to support that model.
Absolutely.
And it gets this double benefit of feeling like there's action in the office, right? Because if only 2 or 3 people are turning up, there's no density. There's no you don't go to the office getting that energy from other people. Particularly if you have a large space and the other 2 people are sitting on the other side of the floor plate, and you don't see them. You may as well be working from home. You're still talking on Slack rather than talking in person. Um, but if we move into a smaller space within WeWork, one of those like little offices within there, and we walk past a buzzing cafe to get there, we go in with I think a bit more energy and motivation, and I think that it really proves the point that an office is still important for things that people maybe take for granted or are assuming maybe the opposite, like you go to the office for meetings only or something like that. Where in my case, like I feel that's the complete inverse for me. Like right now, you're in Ireland, I'm in Sydney. We're not in an office. We're both at home, right? Like I do most of my meetings at home, and I go to the office to do my work. That's the way I like to work. Everyone's got their own personal work
Yeah.
styles. And yeah, when I go to the office, I want to feel some energy. A big part of my job is sales, and sales, as you would know, Gene, is full of ups and downs, right? And sometimes you need people on both of those peaks. When you're down, you need someone to vent to. When you're up, you need someone to pass that energy on to. Otherwise, it's going to bubble up inside of you.
100%. I think that is such an interesting way to put it, because look, there's an elephant in the room here, which is the mental health impact of COVID. So as you know, I'd be a pretty sociable, chatty person. Essentially, I think I've got a pair of friends living in Sydney. Actually, they're Hungarian, so they're notoriously blunt, but they call me the radio. And they'll say, "Can we turn off the radio?" to ask me to tone down. And I think before COVID, you would have to drag me into Dublin city centre. Even in Sydney, it's just infathomably more beautiful city. It was very, easy to justify going to the office, sitting on a ferry, going from Manly to Piermont and looking at the dolphins. In most cities around the world, this is not the case, bit of a slog. But in fact, I have to go to Dublin tomorrow, and I'm excited to go because I live in the countryside. I see nobody. It's insanely beautiful. It's very satisfying, but we're social creatures, and I think salespeople are even more social creatures. And that kind of comes back to something somebody said to me, and it's before I kind of met you in Place OS, and it was an important part of the journey to meeting you guys was working with Woolworths when I was at Cloud Sherpas, working alongside Google, and that was using cloud technology for digital transformation to enable activity-based working.
Yeah,
this is activity-based working 2.0, and I even think that's a bit effusive. I think it's just still activity-based working.
Yes, I agree with you completely on that. It's like people forgot about that focus, which had a lot of research behind it, is much more than just hot desking, which is a common misconception, and boils down to simply having the right space for the person and the tasks they need to do. Because there's two ways to break it down. Individually, we all work differently, but we also can break that down into we all work differently for different things that we're doing. So you need to change your space for the different activities that you're performing. So if take a sales role as an example, there's a whole lot of focus work, writing proposals and follow-up emails, all the things you promise in meetings that you have to get back to people.
Yes.
And 10 people in a meeting and you promise each of them something for the tech guy, something for the sales guy. Like there's a lot of follow-up, and that might take a different space than the space you like to have the meetings in, or it might take a different space than the space you work on strategy with your teammates. And this space is different for every person because everyone has a different persona in their general life as well as their work life, which can sometimes also mismatch it. It's a very hard problem, and this is why moving away from just saying, is anyone at the desk? We need to know so much more than that through technology, also through research and academic study. And there's plenty of that in our industry, which is an undertapped resource. There's plenty of research on the best ways of working. And working is something, office type environments have been around for a while. So we can look at what has worked historically. It's a field of architecture. There's so much rich resources that we're ignoring because we're looking at some very basic metrics that don't tell us anything.
I think you touched on architecture there, and I think that is incredibly important in that I've been lucky enough to kind of make friends, I guess, with some architects here and be able to kind of, talk about all the stuff with them from our perspective. And the key thing that comes back, I think a lot of architects got completely stereotyped in terms of creating nice spaces and creating functional spaces. And I think from my interactions with them, they see a massive opportunity to getting actionable insights and data here, because for them, designing the workplace is about productivity and utility. But there has been absolutely no way to A/B test that.
Yeah.
So I always remember understanding why the food is free at Google. And that is the what if questions with a load of engineers having, lunch or dinner together. And without that space, there will be a quantifiable lack of collaboration and innovation, rather than sticking everybody in the cubicles. But without kind of understanding or being able to A/B test things and kind of going, okay, look, is open plan good? Do we need cubicles? Do we need more meeting rooms? We need more open spaces. Are open spaces actually used? I think that is that freedom to address what is happening and could be happening and adapt those workplaces from an architectural perspective is completely undervalued right now. And I think that's a key thing, because we all have different personas. Every organization is different. Any of your clients, you could probably say, look, professional services companies, they use it in a very intensive fashion, and they're very much gravitated towards, they already know what they want to do. They want to drive efficiency and productivity in the workplace because everyone's in Monday, everyone's in Friday, and they really have to, I think one of your clients uses a cost center to book a meeting room, which is, nowadays, I think things will go that way, back to the cost per user basis. But, a multinational company would use the space very differently and just kind of assume, look, everyone's in anyway.
What I find frustrating is, I work selling a platform, PlaceOS, that can do a lot more than what our customers use it for. This is particularly true for this area we're talking about. If we're putting an umbrella on our conversation, it's basically, utilization versus occupancy.
Pretty much.
And our clients, they mostly just want to know, or they think this is what they want to know. Therefore, that's what they get. A percentage score for the utilization of rooms and desks. It's used 50% of the time during business hours, or 90%. But that number is just so static. It's not true utilization, and it's not correlating anything. So there's no opportunity to understand why something's happening. And we started looking, well, what's the simplest way to find out why? It's to at least have one correlation with feedback. So if the percentage score is, and to do more than a percentage score, to do it more like web analytics of dwell time and other things, but to say, well, this space is underperforming, performance is the key word, what is the feedback for that particular space? And the correlation should be that it's getting low feedback. And then what are the other things we can correlate? So it could be things that the user hasn't noticed but is affecting them, like air quality and lighting levels for different times of the day. You might think you want natural sunlight, but it might be too much. Glare and reflection can lead to eye strain subtly that you don't even realize, and you just feel sluggish.
Observability,
Yes.
I've seen 3 glass-sided meeting rooms, fishbowl.
Yeah.
Look, I don't really mind too much, but some people can feel extremely self-conscious, and it's just, I've seen those actually in a particular employer I worked for before. There was 3 meeting rooms in the reception. You could see right through the office through them. Never used.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be caught on Facebook, even if it's just 20 seconds.
Yeah. So like, imagine if we could, even if a room's performing well, we get good feedback, good utilization, but there's outliers and outlying events. Imagine if HR could contact them and say, well, how can we help you? How can we make your workplace experience better? Perhaps there's a better space for you and for the task that you tried to perform in this scenario. So that's what we could be doing. But frustratingly, a lot of our customers still just want that simple metric. This could open a can of worms, but I think what will change this quite rapidly is chat-based user experience through AI, the ability for these correlations to happen automatically. So for a facility manager or a workplace experience manager to ask, why is my room underperforming? Or why is my zone or my floor or my whatever it is, why is it underperforming? And it can come back with some of the correlations I made as a human expert. I can look at this and make those correlations, but the AI can be trained to be, at this stage, probably as good as me at noticing these correlations and why, but also can reference industry standards and tell you, the science behind it. Air quality, for example, the humidity levels are above 35%, which is usually fine if it's in your house, but for an office environment, the standards are, let's keep it under 35%. So like, you can start telling you why, and therefore give you actionable, back to your, you don't want to overuse this phrase, but actionable insights that are more automatic. It doesn't take a human, because not every workplace has a workplace expert looking at their dashboards. It'd be very uncommon because it's no one's job really. Like, who owns these solutions? Is it HR? Is it IT? It's probably both, but there's not anyone there that like opens it every day trying to get to the bottom of why a space is underutilized.
That behavior is just an extension again of, it was always this way, and we're just going to do things more efficiently and better the way it's always been done. And so kind of drawing an example out there, traditionally, again, even very large organizations wouldn't have their own internal workplace expert. Get consultants in, they measure stuff, they leave, they provide, operational, guidelines that, the organization will work within. They're it's kind of the whole dashboard scenario. I think you talked to quite well, and that's like, because these are the metrics we need to follow, instead of asking a question and kind of taking more kind of a design thinking kind of approach to it. I think to that point, the example of ChatGPT is something that can kind of replace that consultative kind of element in the middle. It kind of says, hold on, like, what are you trying to achieve here, rather than what SOP or what process are you trying to follow. And I think how I see that is a conversation element of it, because if you're integrating everything, the question is, if I know the state of everything and could reason on top of that data, what questions could I ask? Like, that's really what you want customers to go leave a meeting and kind of go, okay, like, I'm not receiving a product here, I'm receiving, a toolkit. So,
but this is like, we can't overstate how much of an impact this can have. If you think about the old way, you'd have to have a dashboard for every metric you're trying to monitor. So you can put the two things you want to correlate, you want to see them on the same dashboard, so you can literally see them and see how they relate to each other. You might put them on the same graph, so you color code the lines and the squiggles on the graph, and you can see how they interact. If it's not on the dashboard, you're not aware of it, right? So the difference with the chat-based user experience is you can ask it things no one's thought to put a dashboard together for. So you don't have to say, wouldn't it be nice if we had this metric? You can just ask it and it gives you the results. It gives you the output. No one has to go hire a software developer to build another dashboard. That's going to, in terms of like the data side of prop tech, that's going to be it's going to make prop tech live up to the expectations that we had of it 10 years ago.
I think so. And I think it'll also trying to put this together in my head, how to kind of say it. But I think one of the things that makes me passionate about technology is the fact that a lot of it is quite arrogant. Maybe that's not the best way to put it, but sometimes I see my parents interacting with technology and they get frustrated with themselves, and I have a look at them like, no, this is just really badly designed. Like you're pretty on top of things for 70-year-olds. Like this is just designed really it's just poorly designed, and that's not doing you justice. And I see things like that chat-based interrogation taking a lot of the insecurity from non-experts out of the equation. So they can ask quite naive and innocent questions that, very often at the time are really kind of key to innovation. Because I think as we started the conversation, like I don't believe that the industry is in a place right now where it's leading the customers in terms of thought leadership. I think they're actually trying to hold them back from
Yes.
innovating, because look, very happy with the way the world was for the last, especially the last 10 years in terms of rents and valuations. I think that chat base really kind of takes things away, and you can just ask really dumb questions, or questions you think are dumb, or you feel like you'd have to be an expert in the area, and it can come back and give you very straightforward questions. And that could be, look, you could be sitting in New York, you could have an office in Sydney, and you could be asking a question like, why is utilization jump this week? And it could be, there's a fire up in the Blue Mountains. People actually want to go to the office because, they stink of smoke. Otherwise, their houses are poorly ventilated, and the office is a refuge in that case. And I think that's also can offer very interesting insights, given the climate scenario right now, and just a massive heat wave across Asia. And, look, air conditioning does not exist in Ireland. We hit, I think, 5 days of over 30 degrees last summer. Don't remember it all in my childhood. Rarely wore shorts in the summer, but if I had a permanent office at that point, I would have been going to the office, because it was a struggle to get work done with the heat and humidity. But again, if you are a CFO, if you are a global property portfolio manager, how are you going to have insights to that local, environmental variability?
You reminded me.
An expert who knows an expert, a regional expert, whereas, something like a chat-based system come back and go, well, yeah, it's just really hot in Sydney right now.
I think it was the Washington Post had a good article. I'll link it. It was early after the pandemic, so maybe like early 2022 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it was about how pizza won't get people back to the office. Having like a pizza day or whatever won't get people back, but the heating and air conditioning will. So it's exactly to your point that just some of the efficiencies of a commercial building that we take for granted, we notice when we're at home, and vice versa, right? Like what you notice when you're at home is that you can control everything around you. Like if I don't like the lighting levels, I've got a light switch. I don't have to like talk to the facility manager to turn the lights off. And if I have air conditioning at home, I have control over that too. So I can make it really cold and, not worry about anyone else. But conversely, on your point on ESG, going to the office for the facilities is very efficient, more efficient than doing things at home. If it's just myself working in my house, mm-hmm. and the air conditioning, the lighting won't be as efficient per user as a commercial building. If I'll choose the right word here, if the occupancy of the building is at the level of best efficiency for air conditioning, the ESG, more directly, the energy usage is ideal, right? It's better than doing this at home. But if you have lower occupancy in the building and your air conditioning is running as if it's fully occupied, then it's a waste of energy. And that's one of these ripple effect things that is happening in commercial buildings that are running at lower capacities post-COVID, is that they're still pumping air, still running all the lights because they're all centralized, as if there's 20,000 people in those buildings, and there might only be 1,000 across 30 floors.
Exactly, and maybe this could be a tangent to what you're saying as well, in terms of like the related to this just utility consumption, but also the kind of ESG element. You can see in the UK at the moment the new ESG directives coming down, and that is very much based on the build of the building. It's an A1 rated building, therefore there's less penalties, I'm just going to put it that way, for using a building like that, and work requirements on, let's say, a C building. But a lot of people are asking the question now, going, but what if the C grade building has a higher operational efficiency than the A1 rated building? So you get an A1 rated building with like a 10% utilization, but you could have a C rated building that is really well managed and hitting things like 70, 80% utilization efficiency. At that point, you got to take a step back as a policymaker and ask yourself, like, what's the unintended consequence of this kind of goaling? Are we goaling? Okay, look, embodied built carbon is super, super important, and I think, not to overuse the term, going down the tangent, but you're going to start to see a lot of behavior soon of, let's say on the growth side, after this recession or whatever we want to call the current economic environment. When a lot of growth occurs again, a lot of headcount growth again, let's say multinationals going to be leasing new buildings? Well, look, if that building is built for them, there's going to be a massive penalty for them to assume that new built carbon costs. Whereas I think the carrot will be to improve the operational, carbon, which is directly linked to the building operations and utilization efficiency.
This is an important area because most of these, all these different standards out there, there's LEEDs and WELL and others, and just like, the A-rated buildings. They're mostly brand new construction because they have the opportunity to design to meet those standards. Everything from the materials in the building, construction processes, like recycling the old building if they've knocked something down, for example. And because they're new buildings and probably large capital projects, they're also large, and that's probably maximizing the efficiencies to help them achieve that score. So to your point, they're assuming occupancy, and there could be like a bit of an issue with these rating systems, and perhaps someone who works for one of these organizations can correct us if we're wrong. But there could be, like, what is the crossover point of occupancy and fully utilized to achieve that score? Or are they measuring and adjusting? Like, if they get these badges, do they get audited? How long does the badge last? And is it just to get that anchor tenant and then they all forget about it? So there's just a lot of moving parts to these building standards, and I think they're important. It's important to have standards, but it's maybe not as simple as it seems to keep them running as they should be.
100%. Like, I could have a Tesla sitting out there that I use once a month versus my 1989 Pajero that I use a lot more often. And when you come down to just any part of the metric, like what is my total cost of ownership? That's really what it's all about. My total cost of ownership, depending on utilization, is far higher for the Pajero than it is from the imaginary Tesla that I would only use once a month. That is the age we're in. I really do believe, like, any element of the macro, whether it's energy, whether it's climate, I think it's all going to be underpinned by efficiency. And I think those regulations will eventually kind of go that way, because, again, we're discussing office, commercial real estate efficiency in the context of, hybrid working operational model. And policymakers are looking at that hybrid operational model in a much broader context. They're looking in terms of commuting. Okay, how can this reduce commuting? It's a massive target here now. You need to reduce road usage, car ownership, stuff like that. And they're putting the carbon costs on that. And it's all about utilization of the roads. So when you follow actually to the office, look, it makes sense to me. Hopefully it makes sense to other people. And hopefully, hopefully it'll make sense to policymakers, but in terms of the industry. But I think actually goaling efficiency rather than how efficient the building could be at maximum capacity, instead goaling it as how efficient the actual building is from the real life human beings who are using it every day or not, makes a lot more sense.
But it's also like, yeah, measuring all these different elements and ignoring the other parts of it, like what we we're just talking about, like your home isn't as efficient as a commercial building, particularly a modern one that we're just discussing, that requires the occupancy to be there to be efficient. So that means people have to commute there in order for that building to achieve its efficiencies. So why have that as a detrimental part of the process, the commute, if it holistically means better ESG outcomes? If you zoom out and look at that workplace or that employer and the building they're in, and it might take people getting there, which is better if they're there rather than being at home, just polluting at home.
100%. And I think that's really what you can see nuggets of people out there. I think one name that comes to mind is here in Ireland, who'd be very well known, would be John Reardon. He's chairman of Grow Remote, which is a remote working advocacy kind of non-for-profit. That's the goal is to get people working in towns and villages again. And they're not really zealots for just remote working. It's hybrid working and distributed working, I think, is actually the phrase that kind of sits best with me, because look, Ireland wouldn't be that dissimilar to New South Wales actually in terms of like how a hub works. So Dublin is really the hub here, and that's where the main office is. So if you're living down the country, let's say an hour's commute from Dublin, that's not dissimilar to kind of living in Wollongong. A lot of people get the train up a lot. But at the same time, there may be opportunities depending on how the team is shaped and formed that, look, you and me want to meet with a member of the team, might want to work on, a sales proposal or something like that, or, and let's say we're all in North Sydney. Are we going to go all the way across the harbour? Or could we go to the WeWork hub, in North Sydney instead? Yes, we still got a commute. Yes, we still get the value out of interacting in person. Yes, we still get the efficiencies at scale that, a commercial provider of, an environment can provide. And I think that is really what I'm trying to kind of see this area now, is zooming out from the office and commercial real estate efficiencies and trying to see the connected journey, I guess, the way I'm trying to see it from a personal.
Yeah, I first heard of this sort of concept before COVID in the very dense city, Hong Kong. They essentially had, second and third cities, people that were living. So Hong Kong Island, and then you have near the airport these residential cities. Basically, it's like there's nothing there but high rises of apartments. The employers were like, well, why are we paying a premium for office space when they all live in these essentially these other cities just outside of Hong Kong? Can we just not, let's just put a local office there. They can come to the main office when they need to, but we'll downsize the main office and have these remote offices. A little bit like retail banking, right? Like there's already a model for that, and it's just taking people the long way around to realize the value of this when it's much more critical, and I guess more people demanding it. I think at the same time, and it's one of my favorite TED Talks is about the efficiencies of city in general, right? Like we are polluting less when we live in cities. It's just a fact. And that's because of everything we're talking about, efficient commercial buildings. Like a lot of the purpose of a city is work. So if we take that away from the city, and we're now looking at this sprawl of employees working all over the place in small towns, more in the suburbs, it's not efficient. It's just not very efficient, and they're not getting the human interaction that's required from not just to be productive, but to be mentally sound and efficient people.
Yeah, I think like we see here actually in Dublin that it's the strongest part of the office market right now is in the suburbs. Those values are actually holding up the best or showing in most demand. But I think, and you're right, we've seen this in banking, it's kind of a distributed kind of model, a hub and spoke model and per use.
Yeah.
Because look, I absolutely, as you know, before the pandemic, I lived in London. It was fantastic, but there was always an ambulance going by every 15 minutes.
Yes.
And as a country bumpkin, when I moved back to Ireland, I moved out into the kind of middle of nowhere. It's fantastic. You can hear the birds in the morning, but it's not a very efficient way to live.
Yeah.
It's not, as a member of society, something that is probably good for society. And I think there's a middle ground, and I think that middle ground, and look, I think it's something that
Just look at the hundreds of years of investment into public transport systems to bring everyone to the central point of the city. So like, no matter where you live in that city, it can be quite large. Like
healthcare, any type of services, entertainment, it's just always going to be more viable, within a kind of a metro area. And I think that's, to address the kind of suburb scenario as well. And my the YouTube algorithm sometimes remembers that, or thinks that I still live in Australia, and starts showing me ABC. And right now, I think Australia is probably around 6 months, a year behind Ireland in the acuteness of its rental crisis. And there's a lot of employers here who are the pennies starting to drop. Like, people don't want the full-time in the office role in Dublin or Cork, because even with the 80K I can give them as a salary, that's going to be 60% of their net pay. They want to live a little bit further out in the suburbs. And I think that complexity is a massive opportunity as well. I think it's getting the best of both worlds, using, again, back to activity-based working. We've got a HQ. We're going to really invest in this HQ. It's going to be a great experience. It's going to be, very efficiently managed, because the cost of it, we're going to have to justify the cost of having a really good HQ. But then taking advantage of, again, service providers like WeWork, to enable teams that, live in or adjacent to suburbs to make decisions. And I think eventually this will come back to being chat-based. I remember a client that we were working on before, where the guy was in London, some of them were in New York, some were in California, and you guys were in Sydney. And we're trying to, where would be the best place to catch up for, a workshop week. And I think that's where, seeing like Google Smart Calendar already kind of doing that for times, we'll start doing that for managers. And there's a whole other tool set out there now. I won't name any. I think if when podcasts are published, I'll give you some names, because there's an Australian startup doing this now, but providing the same kind of level of data insights as to the utilization of the office space is just as important to workplace management, in the insights they get about the behavior of individuals and their teams and how they behave. There is a bit of a struggle right now in terms of middle management, let's say, or people in management, where, obviously very comfortable. They could look down the line and see everybody sitting down, and, they don't feel quite abrupt right now because they're staring at, a lot of them are just staring at a status light, Microsoft Teams or something like that, and they're looking at calendars, and that's all they have to go by. Whereas there's so much data, again, taking, the approach that you take, and that is, if you knew the state of everything, you could read on top of that data, what questions would you ask? And you could ask per OU or per team, like, how are these guys interacting? And it could show, like, this team are actually interacting 50% more in office than hybrid. And you could, drill into that and go, oh, because it's a sales team,
Yes.
They want to be in person more. And how do we enable that? Because it's a very different team to, let's say, a technical support team. I think that is the other side that really complements.
And those metrics, as a good example, but the metrics could also prove your assumptions wrong as well, which is an important thing about metrics. Otherwise, we'll just not use them, right? We'll just make
assume everything.
I
think that's where the world of office resource management becomes can become a function of workplace management, rather than the other way around in many aspects. Because you see, you're assuming everyone's in the office, and therefore you manage your workforce. Whereas now, you're kind of taking a big step back to kind of the whole, like, if you break it down, you've got fully remote, fully office, trust-based hybrid, which is hit and hope. You've got expectation-based hybrid, which is, look, it's 2 or 3 days in your contract, you got to be in the office. We might use badge taps to see, like, you kind of within some sort of degree of that. And then there's schedule-based hybrid. And this all comes back to workforce management and managers getting the insights to know how their team is behaving to either confirm or disprove, assumptions, and then using their office to leverage productivity.
And breaking the technology supporting this away from this static room solution or desk solution, and much more than just something where you say, if I'm working from home today or not, like that's not that useful. I could tell you directly. I don't need an app to tell me that.
Yeah, 100%. And like that touches on something I think I'm also seeing a lot of in industry right now. And I think it was a podcast I saw you do with Memory. And I think at the end, you guys were chatting and kind of going, when will things change? Look, the industry is still living with it. It's still very behind the times, in a lot of respects. And I think I've seen two things come out in the last 2 years inspire me in that respect. First of all, we're seeing another wave of Me Too products. I didn't think it was possible that there were going to be another 1,000 room booking tools, and it's just it's everything's on the feature request, and again it's kind of telling people like here's how you need to operate. And I think I'm seeing a lot of that in one end, and it's it's a bit depressing, to be honest with you, because you're used to coming in picking up the pieces from customers who've been kind of shoehorned into way a product works.
It is weird, isn't it? It's like these fixed ways of doing things. Like, how's that useful to anyone except the people that designed it for themselves?
Like
that simple thing of like a lot of them now, their point of difference feature is that you can schedule, find my team or schedule what days you're working from home or not. But like, it's much more fluid. The work is much more fluid than that. It's not about being at home or being at the office. It's about collaboration and productivity work, right? I'll choose when to do that and where to do that based on what I'm doing. And if I'm working with a team, they don't need to look up my status. I can just tell them, hey, let's meet for a coffee. Let's, I know it's my scheduled work from home day today, but we could, go for a walk in the park or something. Like, it doesn't have to be so mandated by technology people that don't have any academic background in workplace design strategy.
Absolutely not. No, it's very prescriptive, I guess, is the word that kind of jumps to the front of my mind. And
I think consultants have a role to play more today than ever before to get through this noise, to really help customers focus on their outcomes and not get distracted by features of technology.
Yeah. What are your needs? Like, what are you trying to achieve? And again, like agile, not waterfall. Like
yeah.
Your starting point today could be context has never mattered more, because one of the biggest threats, I think, to achieving that efficiency in this space is one size misfits all. And your starting point, on this journey could simply be, okay, let's take from a workforce perspective, why are people in the office and who are they interacting with and what kind of activities are, it's a really activity-based working lens. The other side, using the same data, could provide a CFO of a large organization with a large property portfolio an opportunity to benchmark and kind of go, look, our utilization across CC sites is very similar. Okay, let's have a look now at my energy costs. Holy moly, like they're way diverged. Like, there's an issue here with whoever's managing that. Let's talk to facility management people of site B. And that's I guess, by exception management, I think is the starting point, is like, find the pain, understand what you're trying to achieve, like, and whether that is, increasing return on investment, whether that is, decreasing total cost of ownership, whether that is just purely A/B testing, let's say with air quality, and see, like, hey, look, if we invest in air quality, are people going to spend longer in the office or not, and see how that plays out. Maybe they will. I think starting with a very simple problem statement, and you might ascertain a few of those, across, a portfolio, and really just starting from step one and proving things out. And to say confident is being too confident, but looking at the data available and looking at the divergences, I think taking that agile integration to outcome approach could possibly wash its face. So, like, your POC might actually pay for itself, and the next step or horizon or thing you want to test out And I think that is certainly a massive de-risking versus, I'm going to buy this massive suite, I'm going to buy this like product, and I'm going to invest in a lot of change management and embedding with our employees. And oh no, like it's actually, if this product has been designed by a startup, but their key client was a financial services organization, guess what? Like, we're a technology startup. Like, these, what they
Yeah.
put in their dashboards, just it's just not relevant to how we do things.
And maybe even different demographics that worked there, so the features are biased towards different types of people, and it could be anything. Like, yeah, every workplace has different culture because they have different people, and there's no one size fits all for sure.